You've been training months for your first marathon and now the workload decreases. What's up with that?
Hey, I'm Jack, an average everyday runner hoping to help others learn a little bit more about running. Today, I'm going to chat to you about tapering. I'll cover why we taper and the importance of it, share some tips for tapering itself, and also show you an example of what tapering can look like. Let's get into it. I remember training for my first marathon last year and asking my coach what the heck even was a taper. For me, being clueless on how to even train for an event like a marathon, I learned why the taper is important as a result of doing it for the first time. So why is the taper important? Well, your body needs a break. Depending on how long your training program is, you may have just put your body through 16 to 20 weeks or more of dedicated training on a consistent basis. And you almost get to that point in those final weeks of your program, finding yourself almost skipping your alarms to get out of bed to complete a session, or even considering just skipping it entirely because your body just doesn't feel ready. More often than not, you'll push through to get the session done knowing you've got a rest day coming up in a couple of days or so. But as we reach that 16-week or that 17-week point, our body needs a chance to get ready for the marathon itself. This segues into my next point, being we want to reduce fatigue. A common phrase that I hear runners use is that the hay is already in the barn. Essentially, over the course of your marathon training program, you've put in all those deposits by completing your sessions. So essentially, your body is now at tip-top shape, ready to take on the marathon distance. As you get into the taper, you don't suddenly want to ramp up your training all again to achieve another peak week of mileage. So now you're likely wondering, Jack, well, how much does one taper before a marathon? Now, obviously, if you're watching this as you're getting into the taper period, your marathon plan will likely already have it mapped out too, and I'd be a bit worried if you were at that point of the taper period and had no idea as to what it looked like. I'm not so stressed on the other hand if you're someone just looking at getting into running a marathon and wondering what the taper period is. Anyway, let me get on to a brief explanation as to how much we can taper, and there's really no exact answer to that. In my experience and doing some research, the taper period usually lasts between 1 and 3 weeks before a marathon. This is highly dependent on a range of factors though, including your running experience, your current fatigue levels, and also if there's been any setbacks in your marathon training. The golden rule here when it comes to the taper is to reduce your running volume. Usually in the final 2 weeks, it's by 30% of your peak week mileage, and then in the final week, a further 20%. So you're not running anywhere near as much as what you would have been doing in your training. I will say this again though, that this isn't a magic number that you should suddenly stick towards to. And again, because all of us that are training for a marathon will be running various distances at different abilities, capacities, and current states of fatigue too. So it's highly individual. But I will say this for any runner who may be completing their first marathon training program to stick to the sessions as to what the marathon plan has on it. Trust me, you don't have to add or take away any of the mileage that it lists. Have trust in the program and where it's gotten you now. So now that I've discussed the importance of tapering and why us runners do it in the first place, let me share some tips that I hope you can use for your own tapering for an event you may be training for. Trust the process. It's common for many new runners who may be completing their first training program to feel as if they're losing their fitness over the course of the taper period. But as I've already mentioned, you've made all those gains already in your training program. The reason for the taper is so we can feel 100% come race day. Maintain intensity, but drop the volume. Particularly as we start the taper period, runners will often be concerned as to whether or not they should complete their speed sessions or intervals or any type of quality work that's considered hard running. And I'm here to say that it's completely okay to do so and continue with them. Many marathon programs will actually do it for you, mainly lowering the volume of what you're doing for your interval sessions or any of your speed work that may appear. For example, I myself in my 3-week taper period have halved all of my speed sessions in the lead up. The only week that I don't have any speed sessions is the week of the marathon. Prioritize recovery. This includes your sleep, foam rolling, stretching, and anything that you can do to help you feel 100%. By prioritizing your recovery during the taper period, you're helping your body get back up to 100% and at full capacity, ready to go come race day. Focus on nutrition. It's important to keep your body in tip-top shape as we get closer to the marathon. The taper is an essential period where you can refuel your body and repair it after the damage it's been through over the course of a marathon training block. But most importantly, as we come into the final week of the taper, being ready to top our body up with as much glycogen as possible. Get as much sleep as possible the week prior to your marathon. Many runners won't sleep too well the night before a marathon, and for good reason too. Usually nerves and excitement being the main ones. But as long as you've slept well during the course of the week, I promise you, you'll be okay and you'll get through.
Okay, in this section of the video, I thought it would be useful to show you what exactly a taper period can look like. This is actually my own taper period as I get ready for my second marathon too. So if you look onto the screen now, I started my taper just after the first week of April too. So maxed out at 74.5 kilometers for that week too, before starting to reduce my training load. Looking back at it now, and this is just speaking almost to myself and providing a reflection, I feel like my first week of the taper was dropped a little too low. So I only ended up doing up to 20 kilometers for that long run over the week too. So that dropped essentially 30 kilometers, and not too sure how my maths ended up causing that, but that's just a result of me not really doing much forward planning come up to the taper period for that. Anyways, we got to this week, which is when I'm recording it, so my second last week of the taper, hitting 38 kilometers. So I feel like in hindsight, for future references, I probably would have aimed to have my week one taper period distance be my second last week, aka final week of a full long run before the marathon itself too. And then going into next week, so while I don't have it up on the screen now, essentially, so scratch that, I actually realized I had my Garmin Connect open in the next tab. So this here is literally my final week of the taper before the marathon, on Sunday. So only 3 5-kilometer runs. Haven't really included any sessions or, any sections where I've got strides included. Honestly, just going to see how I feel come this week in terms of my body feeling rested and ready to go. Going back to my taper week for the New York City Marathon last year, obviously we were actually traveling over to New York that week, so had to factor in travel, jet lag, tired legs, and what I had on my schedule for that one looked entirely different to what exactly I did. So I hope you found this section of the video useful. I should have mentioned at the start that this training program was adapted from the Hal Higdon Intermediate 1 training plan too. So have added just a slight touch of variety in terms of the speed sessions, and that's why it looks a little different to what the Hal Higdon one will look like on the website.
So there we have it, a little bit about tapering and why we do it when we train for marathons. I hope you found some of the tips and the information in this video useful for your own marathon journey. And hey, I say this nearing my final week of the taper period and almost wondering if my body's actually ready to run my second marathon. Trust me, I get that feeling of paranoia that all runners seem to go through during the taper period. Hope all is going well on your side of the screen there and that you've been getting out and enjoying your running. And if you're keen to spend some more time with me, YouTube recommends this video here for you to watch. I'm Jack, and I'll see you next time. Catch ya!